Okay, guys, I'm back, but be very quiet. Do not startle the mighty ones. No, okay, I guess it's too late. Now I'm in danger. All right, well, while that's going on, I will read to you the next chapter, which is chapter six. Okay, chapter six, you'll remember that Kimba has now been allowed to go on a hunt. He cannot hunt, he can just watch and be able to see the mighty ones like the ones behind me. I hope they don't step on me, and they do stink. Just to let you know, they're see that they're smelling terrible right now. I'll be okay though. All right, here we go. Chapter six. There was a doubtful look on Rab's face. If Kimba had disobeyed Utrecht again, he told me to come, the boy said, hastily displaying the piece of limestone and the flint he was to sketch with. Kimba fell into step beside Rab. Narek frowned, still not assured that the boy's power was good. He grumbled in a muted voice to his son, Rodag. What did they know of Kimba, despite what Utrecht had said? Nobody knew whose whelp he was. Nobody knew what he would grow into. It was like adopting a bear cub. Later, it would turn on those who had pitied it. Better to slay it at once. And by the way, they never did that. They never adopted any kind of animal. There was no animal that lived with the tribe. Kimba felt the old hunter's anger. He realized he would be blamed every time Narek's hungry stomach growled for meat. The boy hefted his spear. Of course, he would obey Utrecht. He was here to sketch, not to hunt. Yet, he thought once game was seen, many things could happen. There might be a chance for him to rush in. Maybe he might beat them all in the attack. The hunters were moving in an irregular line, several paces apart. Their eyes roved back and forth. They were all tall men, and beside them, Kimba looked small. Skins of wolf, reindeer, or bison covered their bodies and were lashed about their feet. Most had taken their largest spears, anticipating a chance to meet another mighty one. Others were armed with throwing sticks and axes, short clubs with heads of sharp pointed stone for hunting smaller game. They had gone again to the wide river, proceeded north beside it for some distance, then crossed at a spot where glacial rocks were scattered in a bridge-like formation. They pushed onward in the direction of the sun's rising. Here, and if you're looking at your map, that would be to the east. Here, the meadowland was rough. Small patches of forest offered easy concealment to hunted creatures. Rab, on the far left, stopped. He cocked his head, touched his ear, and pointed toward a jumble of rocks and gullies. Stopped, touched ear, and pointed. Narek listened and shook his head. He had detected nothing, but he was older and his sense of hearing was weakening, the others knew. One hunter nodded at Rab and began to run toward the rocks. This was Odlag, the father of Kimba's friend Tabak. Kimba heard a noise too. It was a faint snuffling, hard to distinguish. Odlag clambered over the rocks and into a small ravine. He came to an abrupt halt. Something streaked toward him, then quickly turned and dashed off. The hunters took up pursuit. The narrow ravine permitted only 2 or 3 men to stand side by side. Odlag gestured at something on the ground, but he did not stop running. The others saw what it was, a dead boar. Whatever had slain it had just begun to tear off hunks of flesh when the hunters had surprised it. Now they would have the boar and the flesh of its slayer too. After it, Narek cried. Then he stopped so suddenly that those immediately behind crashed into him. This was the head of the ravine, a high barricade of rock. There was no exit. Odlag, the first man to follow the killer of the boar, crouched facing the trapped beast of prey. There was a menacing growl. Odlag yelled and hurled a javelin from his throwing stick. Kimba wiggled through the knot of hunters to see what had happened. Odlag had missed. The animal sprang. It was the large, red-speckled dog. The onward rush bowled Odd-Lag over. He tried to grip the dog's throat, to fend off the snapping teeth. The two rolled over in the confused fury of close combat. The other hunters pressed forward but were unable to act. They might easily have hit Odd-Lag instead of the dog. Suddenly, Odd-Lag was knocked flat on his back. The dog looked up for an instant to glare defiance at the men crowding in with raised spears. Then its eyes met Kimba's. The snarl died. A strange look, a look of familiarity passed between them. It was the same look they had exchanged after the dog had routed the saber-tooth. "Kill!" Narek shrieked. "The mighty ones!" Kimba shouted. "Where?" "There, I saw them." The boy pointed toward the east, toward the closest table-shaped plateau. The hunters whipped about to look. The dog darted forward in a dizzying burst of speed. Powerful legs propelled its huge body through the ranks of the hunters, tossing them aside. They cried out in surprise. Mrodag alone reacted quickly enough to jab at the blur of red, but it was too late. The dog was past them. Two unleashed their javelins, but the casts were too hurried. The dog bounded up the rocks, out of the ravine, and was gone. "Never mind," Rab told them. "Let the dog go. The mighty ones had been sighted." "I do not see them," said Narek. "Where?" Mrodag demanded. "There, Kimba," said Kimba. "That is not where you first pointed," Narek put in. So Kimba said, "I see the mighty ones." They said, "Where?" Well, my face, something happened. They said, "Where?" And Kimba goes, "Over there." And then they said, "Okay." And then he goes, "Well," and then Mrodag went, "Where are they?" And Kimba goes, "Oh, over there." "That's not where you pointed first." Okay. Does it sound like Kimba saw them? Yeah, I didn't think so either. "That's the way they were going," Kimba said Kimba. "Come," said Rab. Kimba felt suddenly weak, as though he would not be able to walk, for he had not seen any mighty ones. He did not know why he had shouted that he had. He only knew they had been about to kill the dog, and he desperately had not wanted them to. Now remember, Kimba's not like us. Being a 40,000 year ago boy, he would have had a very different take on things. He wouldn't look at dogs as pets and animals that you love. It was a really weird sensation that he did that. And he could screw up meat for the tribe once again. All right, so just know that this doesn't typically happen. All right. Okay, we go. So he had yelled the only thing he knew that would distract the hunters long enough to let the dog escape. And why should he let the dog escape, he asked himself. The tribe needed meat. So one such animal would not satisfy the entire tribe, but wild dogs were fair game, just like bison and reindeer. He had again acted contrary to the interests of the tribe. True, the dog had saved his life, but why must the tribe lose because he chose to repay a debt of gratitude? It was a hunter's part to kill wild game. Did he not still thirst to be a hunter? Shame drenched him. They would soon know he had seen no mighty ones. He had disgraced Rab once more. Odd-Lag struggled up. He was torn and bleeding from his fight with the dog, but able to continue. Maybe Utrecht would have something to put on the wounds later. Until then, Odd-Lag would have to endure the pain in silence and keep up with the rest. There was no time for pity from the others, and no hunter would waste energy pitying himself. Thoughts of pain were shoved aside at once. Narek looked at Kimba suspiciously. Now they would know, he said, if the boy's power was good or bad. And if it was bad, he left the threat unspoken. Kimba lagged behind the others. Maybe his power was bad. He had not intended to hurt the tribe, but that was all he seemed to be doing. Maybe his power was so bad that it made him do these evil things in spite of himself. He should tell Rab he knew. Tell him there were no other mighty ones. There were no mighty ones at all. That it had been a made-up story. And then he must let them do to him what they felt was just. Utrecht was not here to protect him. Now, those who wanted to banish him might have their way. Banishment would almost certainly lead to his death, he was aware, No one could survive for a long period without the assistance of kin, meaning family members, or companions. For someone alone, death might not be immediate, but it would certainly come. Yet Kimba could not continue to lead them astray. He tugged at Rab's elbow. He's about to tell Rab. The spearmaker placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, as he often did. Rab? Rab? A hunter waggled his spear in great glee. Mighty ones! Mighty ones! To Kimba, it was as though a heavy boulder had been lifted from his back. He, like the others, squinted at a ribbon of light green. It was a grove of poplars, which is a type of tree, that seemed to stitch together the choppy meadowland and the foothills that led to the next steep plateau. Something was moving among those trees. Yes, it was the mighty ones. They were very near the spot at which Kimba had pointed. Rab grinned at Narek as though to say, you see, the boy did sight them. Now Kimba realized he need not admit his deception. But was it a deception? Could the power actually have caused him to point as he had, even though he had not known it at the time? Such thoughts made his head whirl, as it did when he stared too long at the moon. Such thoughts were too complicated, too unnatural. He knew the hunters would never understand. Even Rab would not. They were good, simple men. They left such thoughts to those like Utrecht, who dealt with the unseen. Almost at once, the mighty ones, for it had looked like a herd of the shaggy giants, much like the ones right behind me, were still, let's see, lost my spell. When the hunters reached this thin stretch of forest, giants were lost to sight amid the faraway trees. When the hunters reached this thin stretch of forest, the mammoths were still nowhere to be seen. The men began to climb the lowest of the plateau foothills. Then they heard a sound that stopped them instantly. It was the angry, thunderous trumpeting of two bull mammoths. Only for a moment did the men pause, glancing furtively at each other. Then, knowing the tribe had to have meat, they continued up the sand and thick grass of the hillside. Once at the top, they lay down flat and stared into the valley. They made no effort to quiet their grunts of wonder. The noises below were so loud that their voices could not have been heard. The sight was one that not even Narek had witnessed. Narek's the oldest hunter, remember, before. Two immense bulls were battling to the death for the supremacy of the herd. The other mighty ones, 10 or 15 of them, watched from a safe distance. The valley was a natural arena, wide and open except for sparse patches of vegetation and clusters of rocks. The hillside where the hunters lay formed one wall of the arena. The other wall, the far slope of the valley, rose steeply until it joined the sheer cliffside of the plateau. The rounded, wrinkled heads of the bulls butted together, their hairy trunks gouged at one another, and their curving tusks, longer than a man was tall, hooked and stabbed cruelly. One of them, Kimba observed, was the one tusk. Remember the one that chased Kimba and then they didn't catch him, they didn't kill him. He poked Rab, but the spearmaker had seen it too. The one tusk, despite its handicap of only having the one tusk, was bigger and more aggressive. Its legs were as thick as tree trunks. Its gigantic humped body moved lightly. Its lone tusk was everywhere, slashing from both sides, pulling back, thrusting from the front. The one tusk had been alone before. Now, evidently, it intended to destroy this bull mammoth and take over for itself the herd of females and their young. There were bright stains of blood spattered over the long, stiff, hairy coats of both beasts, but there were not so many on the one tusk. Its opponent shrilled powerfully, but the one tusk's bellow was even louder. Their heads smashed together once more, their tusks locked, and they stood pushing and swaying, trumpeting into each other's faces. Rab leaped up and signaled the other hunters, just like this guy behind me, leaped up and signaled them. Now was the time. While the two bulls fought each other, the rest of the herd would not expect an attack. The hunters were not close enough to rain boulders down on the animals, and there were no deep holes below to use as traps. They would have to engage the mighty ones at close range. When they had been compelled to do this before, they had usually cut the leg tendons of the lumbering creatures. This either brought them down at once or so crippled them that the hunters could follow until they fell. But it was dangerous and very uncertain work. Kimba rose too, but Rab pushed him down. He grinned and pointed to the boy's sketching block. There would be much to draw. There would never be a better chance to see so many mighty ones. The boy sank back onto the sand at the top of the hill. He watched the hunters wind their way into the valley. Then he turned back to the bulls and began sketching. With quick strokes of his flint, he reproduced their battle on the flat stone. The two mammoths were still locked together by their tusks, hurling their tons of weight against each other, pulverizing the ground under them. The hunters were slipping up on the nearest cow mammoth, now approaching from the off-wind side, spreading out like a noose about to be pulled tight. Popping up and down in the bushes and behind rocks, they drifted toward their target. Kimba tensed. The sight of the mammoths was vivid in his mind. He could sketch them later in greater detail. Now would be the time for him to join the hunters. Now he would not be stopped. He would do as Utrecht had directed, make likenesses of the mighty ones, but he would participate in his first hunt too. There was a sudden bellow. The one tusk had pulled free with one rapid movement and sunk its lance of ivory, its tusk, deep into its enemy's throat. The roars of the dying mighty one turned to squeals, and its gigantic bulk leaned sideways and crashed to earth. The victor raised its trunk in triumph. Its blood-covered tusk glimmered in the late afternoon sun. It trumpeted again, and this time no rival dared offer challenge. Kimba looked back at the hunters. The cow mammoths still had not detected them. They were very close now. In an instant, they would race in, spears flashing. Kimba began to run down the hillside. Then the one tusk bellowed once more, but not in victory this time. There was rage in the sound. Horrified, Kimba realized that the large bull had seen the hunters. It came bursting toward them, shrilling its anger. The hunters scattered, while the rest of the herd began to echo the one tusk's trumpeting. The bull mammoth bore down on the nearest man. Its trunk picked him up and smashed him to the ground. Without stopping, the one tusk changed course and started after the next hunter. The man stumbled, fell, and screamed as the huge body galloped over him. The one tusk turned and made for its next victim. The hunter ran desperately for the hillside, but for such a clumsy-looking beast, the mammoth's speed was startling. It closed the distance quickly. As the mighty one was about to trample him, the man whirled. Kimba saw with a shock that it was Rab. He pushed his spear into the mammoth's charging body and dodged to one side. The mighty one screeched in pain and savagely hooked its tusk up, catching Rab on it. Another cliffhanger here. So Rab turned, the tusk came right into him, hooked him onto the tusk. Obviously, we won't know until tomorrow when we read if he lived or died. We don't know. Okay, but can you imagine Kimba having to watch that horrifying scene? Okay, guys. Well, thanks for hanging out. I think the smell is too much for me right now. I'm getting out of here, especially before I get trampled by these giant things. Okay, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take care, be good, and we will read again.